This is Fintech Chatter, presented by Tier 1 People, leaders in Fintech executive search. And I'm your host, Dexter Cousins. In today's show, we're joined by Chris Skinner, one of the most influential people in technology, and commentator on Fintech through his blog, Finanser.com. His latest book, which is his 16th, is called Doing Digital. He chairs the Financial Services Club and Nordic Future Innovation, is a non-exec director of 11FS, and sits on the advisory boards of various fintech, including Moven. Chris has been an advisor to the United Nations, the White House, the World Bank, and the World Economic Forum. And he's a visiting lecturer with Cambridge University, as well as a TEDx speaker. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, Dexter. Nice to be here.
It's really good to have you on, and you're dialing in from Poland. Is that right?
Yeah, I've been locked down here for a year, and I would say it's been hell, but to be honest, it's not been too bad. It's actually beneficial to be in a country where you don't speak the language because there's no reason to go out.
Well, you could apply that to Newcastle upon Tyne if you ever go there.
Oh, tell me about it. Or Liverpool or Birmingham. Yeah.
Well, I wonder if you could tell, I did an intro, but I wonder if you could tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are, Chris.
Well, I've floated around banking, technology, financial markets for all of my career and life. And I did a presentation many, many years ago, and the feedback form said, tell me something that I don't know. And I realized that I'd talked a lot about the industry and how it's changing, but not enough about what the outcome of that would be. So ever since that feedback form, which I still distinctly remember, I've spent my whole career and life focusing on what's next, what's the future. It's the only thing we don't know. And I ended up losing my job in 2002 because I'm not employable. And
why are you not employable?
Because I challenge people too much. That's why I describe myself as a troublemaker on LinkedIn. So, basically, I don't like the way the world is. I want it to change for the better. And ever since 2002, I've been quite lucky in that what were my hobbies became my job. So speaking, researching, writing about how technology is changing financial services.
It's fascinating to hear you say that, because for the last 5 years, I've been advising my network to become far more broader in order to keep their future career alive, and to focus on things like content creation, learn how to present, learn how to write, learn how to market themselves. So it's fascinating to hear you kind of say that you kind of left the corporate life and have kind of flourished by doing those very things.
I also think it's funny because a lot of people follow my blog and what I talk about because I say it how I see it. And the reason that I do that is that I'm not actually employed by anybody except Chris Skinner. So, I'm not accountable to anybody. And so I can say it how I see it. There's so many people who, when they write or talk, because they're employed by a company, they have to stick to the company agenda, and it makes them far more constrained.
Great. So we don't need to get PR to run over this once we've recorded, then. Fantastic. Now, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the books, because is it 16 that you've published now?
Yeah, and in fact, I'm working on another 6 at the moment.
6?
Yeah, some children's books and business books. During lockdown, having been here for over a year, I've got 2 little boys who are 4 years old, and I've been creating children's stories for them. But I'm working on the continuing theme of how digital is changing our world, specifically our financial world. But the newest one is talking about how it's changing our world in general, overall. And, when you look at the digital transformation of planet Earth, originally, I think a lot of people knew that technology would make life different.
Mm.
And yet, when you look back, you don't realize how different life has become
Yeah.
until you see things unfolding. So there's a fantastic slide that I captured the other day, which is an advert for the iPod in 2001 saying, carry 1,000 songs in your pocket. And there's an advert for the Apple iPhone that was out in California in the last few months saying, carry 64 million songs and a library in your pocket.
Mm.
Yeah, and our world is so radically different because of the internet,
Yeah.
and a lot of business, particularly banking business, but government business, general business, hasn't caught up with the trend.
New startups approach us, and I'm just really blunt with them to say, you're building an analog product for a digital world. You need to be building a digital product for a digital world. And I think that banking's a great example where we've not seen anything that challenges the old models that they're still using, whether it's a credit risk model. We keep hearing about data and open banking here, and it seems as if it's just a use to flog more product on an aggregator platform.
Yeah, and one of the things that we say quite often, and I say we, 11FS, who I work with very closely as a consulting group, is that digital is only 1% done. And what's actually happening is that so many companies are just taking what they did before and trying to replicate that on the internet rather than
Yeah.
that challenging what they did before and reinventing it for the internet.
Mm.
And I talk a lot these days about being cloud native versus being cloud based, for example. So, cloud
Yeah.
native is as if you were born in the cloud. Cloud based is you've evolved into the cloud.
Mm.
It's a huge difference between the two approaches.
Yeah. What are you seeing as being the kind of advantages of being cloud native?
Well, primarily that during lockdown over the last year, we've seen so many companies having to create structures built for being at home, whether it's working at home or service at home. And if you're cloud native, then working or servicing the home is intuitive, frictionless, and simple. Whereas if you are cloud based, then actually it's not simple or frictionless or easy. It's actually quite difficult because
Mm.
the processes are not built for being at home. They're built for being in a branch or being in an
Mm.
office. And you can't just take what you did before in an office or a branch and put it in the cloud. You've got to
Yeah.
reinvent it. You've got to rethink it.
Yeah. What's your take? A little bit off topic here, but I've noticed you've I don't know if the word softened is the right one, but you seem to have kind of warmed a little to digital currencies. And I read something today about what you'd put on NFTs, which I absolutely agree with. I think it's probably one of the best use cases I've seen yet for a cryptocurrency. But what's your take on digital currencies and how much they're going to make a difference to the way in which we bank?
Well, in general, I'm still a bit of a bear on cryptocurrencies, and I find it difficult to believe in a currency that has no asset behind it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people argue against that discussion because they say, "Oh, well, the asset is the network, it's the internet, it's the ability for Bitcoin, specifically Bitcoin, to democratize." Um, and now, for many years, I've been far more of a believer in Ethereum than in
Yeah.
Bitcoin. And the reason why I'm more confident in Ethereum is because I can see from a smart contracts viewpoint the construct that that's offering
Yeah.
to corporate and government and how it could work. Whereas Bitcoin, I just don't see how it can work fundamentally in the economy. And I still have that view.
Mm.
So that's the reason why central bank digital currencies versus Bitcoin will become an interesting debate over the next decade.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I bought some Bitcoins. I'm very happy.
Yeah. It's just fascinating though, right? I was watching Wall Street, the 1986 movie, And Michael Douglas points to a painting and he says, see that painting? I bought it 10 years ago for $60,000. I could now sell it for $6 million. The illusion has become reality. And the more real it becomes, the more people want it. And I think the next day was when I read about a JPEG being bought for $60,000 and sold for $6 million 4 months later. It's just surreal, right? That throughout the whole of civilization, the whole of history, this is just repeating itself. But with the internet now, it's like it's on steroids.
Yeah, and what you're seeing is a lot of frivolous activity. So, for example, a piece of art was bought the other day. I can't remember the amount, but let's say it was $5 million and set fire to by some millionaire, billionaire investors who were riding a wave of cryptocurrencies.
Right.
And what we're really seeing is, it's not a tulip bubble, which is what everyone equates it to. I think it's much more a change in the way in which we think about our reality.
Yeah.
And the change in our reality is because of technology. And in that context, Bitcoin is actually very important. It's not necessarily the future. It might be. I mean, I personally don't think so, but a lot of people would disagree with me. But I think what we're seeing is the way in which we view everything from government to commerce to trade to business to banking to currencies to technology is changing because of the very nature of how we're progressing. It's a little bit like I made the comment the other day. Today Elon Musk is what the Wright brothers were a century ago, and in a century from now, we will probably travel to the moon and back like we get on an airplane.
Yeah.
The idea of that to us today is, massive. It's huge. It's hard to even imagine, and yet 100 years from now, it'll be commonplace and normal. So you have to rethink everything based on what's happening, and what's happening is quite clearly that digital currencies are replacing fiat currencies.
Yeah. Now, having said that, though, Chris, 50 years ago, we sent 3 people to the moon and brought them back safely on, yes, less computational power than in a smartphone. And yet banks still can't fix legacy systems.
Well, I mean, again, that's another comment I regularly make, which is that we can get real-time images from Mars, and yet I can't actually get an update on my latest payment. And when I do get an update on my latest payment, what I get is a truncated message saying, you've just been paid $1,000 by... And it's like, what the hell is that? I have no idea who that is. Because banks' mainframe systems are still the core engines behind the apps and the technologies that they serve customers with today.
What I did mention was it might be an idea for banks to hire NASA engineers rather than bankers.
Not necessarily. I mean, it's interesting.
It was tongue in cheek, but
well, I know, but I actually used to work for Unisys, who some people might still remember. And I always have this distinct dialogue over a cocktail party with some of the other teams, where one of the guys who ran the transport division said, "Oh, we were the guys who put a man on the moon using the UNIVAC computers back in the 1960s." And I said, "Well, why don't you ever mention it?" And he said, "Well, it's history. No one's interested." I said, "Do we still work with people in NASA?" And he said, "Yeah, we do the space shuttle simulations." And, it is kind of that thing around a lot of people don't realize if they use their imaginations, what they can achieve.
yeah,
And that's particularly true in banking because a lot of people in banking are so constrained by legacy thinking. By way of example, if you say something like you could give a customer all the information they need about a transaction, not just the truncated message, they'll say, "Oh, regulators won't allow it." And then you say, "Have you asked the regulator? Have you talked to Google about the APIs they can offer to integrate into the services that you offer? Have you thought about using Stripe?" Oh no, they're competition. They're not competition. They could be complementary. And so it's kind of changing the mindset to keep up with the times.
Yeah, well, we had that here in Australia, right, with APRA and cloud, banks using cloud. And I think it was, fairly pivotal discussion that maybe 7, 8 years back. And it's been remarkable to see, certainly CBA, I think, are really forging ahead. And, from a technology perspective, they're doing some really great stuff as well.
Well, I always use the example of Commonwealth Bank of Australia, going way back when. And their CIO was presenting to the board the infrastructure as a service plan. And the chief executive said, Mike, this is a ridiculous plan. Get out of here. The regulator won't accept it. And 6 months later, the CIO came back into the boardroom to present the plan for infrastructure as a service. And the CEO said, hey, we told you this wouldn't work 6 months ago. Why are you coming back with the same plan? Said Mike, I got the regulator here. Bob, come in here. Reserve Bank of Australia regulator, supervisor came in and said, I've approved the plan. What's your problem? And I think so often it's like people believe there's a problem when there isn't one.
Yeah.
Because they're not willing to challenge the system or the thinking. And you'll know from my blog, Dexter, that that's what I do all the time. I'm challenging the system and the thinking, because what you have to do is challenge it. And the answer may be no, but at least you've asked the question. If you don't ask the question, what's the point?
Yeah. And it's not the regulator's job to innovate, right? It's the regulator's job to make sure that if you innovate and that it doesn't go wild.
Yeah, it's the regulator's job to make sure that if you're doing something different, it's not going to damage the society and the customer. And as long as they give you a tick in the box, full steam ahead. Now,
we're going to take a break in a minute. I want to give a segue into the next part of the discussion, which is your kids' books. And this, I'm not doing this as a book plug. I'm doing this because I think the most eye-opening or the thing that's changed my view on what's possible in technology more than anything else has been watching my kids, who are 10 and 8. And I often think when I look at startups, youth is the creativity part, experience is the execution bit. And so I'm really fascinated to have a chat with you about the kids' books and what they're going to be about. And also, we got a new section, which is to say hi to my boy Harry and give him a bit of advice on fintech as well. So we're going to just take a quick break, Chris, and then when we're back, we'll have that chat. Tier 1 People helps world-class fintech launch, scale, and innovate. As the fintech industry in Australia begins to mature, many of our early startup clients are now becoming enterprises. And as fintech goes mainstream, many enterprises are reinventing themselves as fintechs. Tier 1 People proudly works with companies at the forefront of fintech innovation. Our clients include international fintech, corporate ventures, big tech, tech platforms, banks, payment providers, and financial institutions. We're about to kick off a number of searches for program and project management professionals to deliver significant acquisition, integration, and change programs. We're interested in talking to talent with expertise in merging fintech startups with banks, technology integration specialists in lending and banking, and those with expertise in transforming legacy financial services businesses into fintech. If you'd like to be on our radar for these upcoming opportunities, go to info@tier1people.com. Welcome back, Chris.
Yeah, hi again, Dexter.
So what words of advice have you got for young Harry?
I would like to be creative and clever, but I would actually stick with don't be evil. Which, okay, it came from Google, but it's kind of just do the right thing, be a good person.
Awesome. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about these kids' books?
Well, it's quite surprising for me because, those who know me know that I'm normally writing a lot about serious topics. But I've got two twin boys who are 4 years old, almost 5. And during lockdown, I've been reading to them every night. And I just got fed up with reading them stories that were either too young for them, Winnie the Pooh, Peter Rabbit, or too old for them, Spider-Man and Superman and Batman. And so I decided to make up a story, and it became a series of stories about Captain Cake, who is a Victoria sponge cake who comes to life thanks to a ray gun from General Rock. And amazingly, my publisher bought the book and, in fact, commissioned 5 books. So
Wow.
I've now produced 5 books about Captain Cake. In fact, I've just finished the 6th.
Awesome. So what's the kind of thinking around it? Like, what are some of the themes that you're trying to get out there?
It's about friendship and teamwork and recognizing the value of each person in the group. So we've got Captain Cake, Lieutenant Chocolate, Sergeant Jelly, and Private Potato. And end of day, Private Potato is always the one who's the most important member of the team because she's the one who knows how to fly the ship, and none of the others do.
So it sounds a bit like a startup.
It's kind of it is, and it's also a bit of a Mickey take on Star Trek and other programs. But they travel around a universe that's in my head rather than in the solar system.
Hmm. Now, we've seen obviously a lot of change over this last 12 months. It feels like COVID's kind of accelerated or really accelerated that change. But what do you see as the future of banking, Chris?
Right now, we're at a crossroads. There's a lot of banks that will disappear over the next decade. And I know people have heard that so many times before. Yet I think we're at a position where the banks that are not using data effectively will be acquired by the banks that are using data effectively, whether those banks are new startup fintech challenger banks or traditional banks. Because data is the key asset that needs to be leveraged in the financial ecosystem. And it's the only thing that traditional banks have as a leverage point. They don't have the processing structure anymore. They don't have the customer relationship anymore. All they have is data leverage. And if the banks are not using data leverage properly, then what are they here for?
Yeah. When you say data, are you talking about them just selling more stuff? Like we've seen, Google and Facebook use data all the time, but it's just to get people to click on ads.
No, it's not selling stuff. It's being customer intimate, and the majority of artificial intelligence discussed in banking is around compliance
Yeah.
and risk and fraud. It actually should be about customer intelligent service and customer intelligent marketing. And when I say customer intelligent marketing, it's not to sell them stuff, it's to inform the customer better about their financial lifestyle and needs and make them aware of things that will better serve them in their financial lifestyle and needs. We keep saying that banking is becoming invisible. It's dumb pipes or smart pipes, depending on your view. And within this, the only thing you can really start to leverage is the customer relationship through their data and the analytics of their data, and using that data to actually be more intelligent about the customer in terms of service and marketing and not ripping them off. I mean, you'll know from the Royal Commission that the Australian banks have a terrible reputation of ripping off customers, just as the British banks do and the American banks do. And that's got to be turned around. It's got to be far more predictive, proactive, personalized service.
Now, COVID, it's not just had an impact on industries, but it's also had an impact on the way that we work. And the path that you've chosen is now a path that a lot of people are saying, hey, maybe this is the future for my career as well. What words of advice have you got for anybody who is contemplating going on a path similar to yourself, where I would describe you as having a portfolio career which you use to generate revenue and to create wealth? What would be your kind of guidance to anybody who's looking at following a similar path?
There's quite a number of things. I guess one is don't plan.
Was it John Lennon who said, life is what happens whilst you're busy making other plans?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got to have a direction, but you can't be fixed in your view. You've got to be very flexible in your view. And I guess a second part of that, which is complementary, is you've got to have curiosity. You've got to wake up every morning, just being excited about and wondering about what's going to happen this day, this week, this month, this year. You've got to have curiosity and flexibility, but equally, you have to create some form of routine. And, and to be honest, that's very difficult for me. So, by way of example,
You've just crunched out 6 books. What's the difficulty are you finding in it?
until March 2020, I was literally probably taking a flight every single day somewhere. And since March 2020, I haven't flown anywhere. I've been in a room for a year just doing what I'm doing. But the routine is basically a discipline. And so my discipline is write something every day that's about 1,000 words, which is my blog. And then also I have other routines. So another routine of mine, for example, is anytime I see anything interesting that I could use in the future in a presentation, log it in a PowerPoint file. So any headlines or news I see or things that make me interested, like the Mars Perseverance expedition at the moment, I will log in a file. I may never use that, but the fact that I've logged it is a routine that's important in terms of driving your intelligence and your depth. And so I think curiosity, flexibility, depth are all aspects that you have to have, along with a routine of nurturing and nourishing curiosity, flexibility, and depth.
And what about the commercial side to it? Because I think one of the challenges a lot of people have, particularly if they come out of a corporate environment, is actually they've got to learn to sell, right? And they've got to learn to market themselves. How did you kind of get that happening, and how did you build your reputation and your brand in the market?
Well, I mean, a lot of it's down to the fact that I'm a voice that's talking every day, and I'm lucky I was in a position that I was in blogging and LinkedIn and Twitter before a lot of other people were. So that amplified my voice. But from the commercial side, I guess my key lesson that I learned once I was unemployed is don't focus upon your internal network, focus upon your external network. And it's too easy to become focused upon, the people you work with, for, and who you manage. What you should be doing is actually thinking about who are the people that you know elsewhere who might be able to assist you if you ever need it in the future to move on.
One of the things that I've found, certainly in this last 12 months, and it's blown me away, some of the feedback and also the commercial opportunities that have come through just consistently doing the podcast, has been the power of creation, creating content, creating things of value for people that make it much easier to connect than reaching out, trying to sell something. I always knew intuitively it was the right thing to do. I just never thought it would be as powerful as what it actually is.
Yeah, I mean, people who have ideas will always be in demand. Having said that, it's better if you have ideas that can be implemented.
Now, we're going to wrap up, Chris, but before we do, which fintech has got you most excited right now, and why?
I mean, there's a number I'm intrigued by, in particular Nubank that came out of Brazil, because they are doing incredible things across South America in growing a business that's built for not just doing challenger banking, but new banking, financial inclusion specifically. I'm also still intrigued by the likes of Ant Group and Stripe, and some of the European companies like Revolut and Monzo. I'm watching them all very closely. But if I looked at specifically some of the newer companies, I think there's a lot of things happening in the African nations that are doing things differently. And so I would probably look towards the economies that were underbanked for the innovation in the next generation of finance.
Cool. And what's your general view of fintech in Australia?
It's catching up, and I may offend people by saying that, but when I last came to Australia was a couple of years ago, and I've been pretty regularly over the last decade.
Mm.
And what I would say is that a decade ago, I think the Reserve Bank of Australia was kind of not really with the program and didn't understand how fintech would change the game. Their change of policy, which I think probably I started to notice in about 2017 because of the impact of Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai, and others, means that Australia's done a very good, quick catch up and is now one of the better markets. But I do remember, I can't remember which company it was, but there was a company that originally established itself in Sydney in about 2013 that moved to London because London had a much better fintech ecosystem. I think now they would return and move back to Sydney.
Well, we're going to wrap up, Chris, but where can people find out more about your books?
It's easy to catch up with me. I'm Chris Skinner on Twitter, Chris_Twitter. And my blog is thefinanser.com, or if you prefer, captaincake.com.
Cool. Well, Chris, it's been really great to have you on the show, and thanks for sharing your insights. And you can find me, Dexter Cousins, on LinkedIn, Dexter Cousins on Twitter. You can also follow the Fintech Chatter page on LinkedIn and the Tier 1 People page on LinkedIn. That wraps up today's show, folks. Thanks for listening. If you like today's show, please subscribe to the podcast and don't forget to leave us a review so we can bring you more great guests like Chris. This show is produced by Tier 1 People, leaders in fintech executive search. We'll help you launch, scale, and innovate by delivering world-class talent. And you can reach us info@tier1people.com. Until the next episode, stay safe,